Welcome back to the Teacher Experience podcast. We are so grateful to have you here. We are your guests, Miss Wild and Miss Dearman, and we are super excited to talk to you again. Before we start, this is just a reminder, please do follow us on Spotify, Amazon and YouTube to help us reach as many teachers as possible. Also, we are still running our teacher notebook competition with Tidy Think UK. They're an award-winning company and we have a competition for you to win one of their notebooks. So just head over to our Instagram. It is the blue grid post and all the information is there for you. Good luck. So today on the Teacher Experience podcast, we bring you, as always, the best tips, tools and strategies to excel in your teaching and beyond. Today, we have an incredibly special guest who has dedicated over a decade to helping students conquer the complexities of biology and achieve the grades that they truly deserve. Our guest is Miss Estruch, a seasoned biology teacher and tutor with over 10 years of experience. Miss Estruch has made her mission to not only help students understand biology, but also improve their exam techniques and build their confidence. Whether students are breezing through practical assessments but find themselves freezing at the thought of exams, or if they're just some topics that seem impossible to grasp, Miss Estruch is here to help them overcome those hurdles. She offers a wealth of resources, including comprehensive revision materials, an active recall workbook, and a guide to creating an effective revision timetable. Miss Estruch's insights are designed to help students get to grips with studying biology, refine their exam strategies, and ultimately achieve their grades they've been working so hard for. So stay listening if you are interested in hearing Miss Estruch's tips and tools to helping students to get those grades. Without further ado, welcome Miss Estruch.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me today. I know it's been a long time we've been waiting to have this meet. Had to keep on waiting for exam season to be done. But yeah, really excited to talk to you both.
So we start every episode with a what went well and an even better if. So Miss Estruch, please could you tell us your what went well from this week?
So my what went well and even better if are kind of linked together because this week I have been, the last 2 weeks I've been doing exam marking as well as being at school in between. And what went well was I completed it without any hiccups as well. But it did mean that I was working all day at school and in the morning I was doing the marking and then doing about 5-6 hours every evening marking. So it went well that I finished it, but it would have been even better if I'd realised the deadline was actually on Monday and not Thursday, so I could have maybe had some downtime each night. Instead, I feel absolutely frazzled, exhausted and ready for the weekend. But there we go. I managed to get the job done and that's the main thing.
Thank you for sharing that. I think exam marking, so many people are doing that or have been doing that recently, and it does just take up so much time, but also the benefits of doing exam marking are huge, especially for professional development, and it improves teachers' ability to teach the content when they understand the mark scheme in such depth. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Organisation is key, but sometimes we just lose it. Cool. So next, we'd like to know what a typical day looks like for you.
I've kind of split this up a bit because I'm a part-time teacher now, so I have a typical school day versus a typical one of my days where I'm working at home. So a typical school day, I'll be up at about 6 a.m, getting myself ready and my twin 3-year-old boys ready for nursery. Then we drop them off. I'm then at school by about 8 a.m. and then usually I have one-to-one tutorials because I'm a sixth form tutor. And the way my school does it is instead of having an entire form time, across a fortnight, you see every student for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I normally do that in the morning when I arrive. Then throughout the day, depends which day it is, how many lessons I have versus free periods, but I'll be teaching. And when I'm not teaching, it's planning and marking. So that's my typical day at school. I actually leave really punctually at school now. I leave bang on 3:20 when I'm allowed to go. And then I come home, do about an hour to an hour and a half of work on my business. Then I go and collect the boys at about 5:30, and then I'm playing with the boys, getting them ready for bed, and about 7 p.m. they go to bed. And now this year I have successfully hit my goal of do not work in the evening. So from 7 p.m. I then chill. If you asked me that a year ago, I would have been working till about 9 p.m. at least. But that was my one agreement with myself. If I go part-time, you will not work in the evenings on your business. So I've pretty much stuck to that most nights. And then if it's one of my days off, which is Thursdays and Fridays for me, same in the morning, getting the boys up, getting them ready, getting them to nursery. And then it depends what projects I have on at the moment, but it's usually things like scripting YouTube videos or my short form content for TikTok and Instagram, filming all of that content, creating resources, editing resources, doing things like this as well. And also this year and the year before, I was writing books for Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press. So this year, my Thursdays were just completely filled up with writing for them until about Easter. So it's quite different depending on what day of the week it is, but always chock a block full. And then next year, I've actually left teaching. I've had it in my notice, so I've only got a few days left of school ever. So then next year, I'm going to have to come up with some sort of schedule to try and block my time, theme my days, to stick to a routine as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. I think, oh my gosh, there's so much there that was just fascinating. The first part I noticed was that you're able to finish school and leave school by 3:30 in the afternoon. I mean, that's every teacher's goal at the start of the September, to not obviously stay for hours and hours after school. But I feel like so many teachers struggle to maintain that goal at the start of the year. Is there any sort of tips you could share which means that you are able to do that?
There's a few things. First of all, I get in early. So I get in early and I put in the hours before I actually start teaching. I work through lunchtime, so it's not exactly an amazing trade-off, but I make the decision of, I know I've got childcare, so I'm going to work solidly while I have that childcare, and then I can leave earlier. Also this year, I was used to being head of department. Now I'm not head of department. So that's freed up so many of those jobs that I used to have to do that I don't. And it's not something I would have been able to do when I first started teaching. But now, because I have been teaching, I think I'm in my 14th or 15th year now, I have everything planned. And if you just said to me, like, you need to go and teach this topic right now, I could just do it off the cuff. So I don't have to spend anywhere near as much time planning, creating the resources. It's all there. It's all mega organized. But that's not something I could do until at least like 5 years into teaching. So that's how I've managed to make it possible, and just being disciplined with myself. Like, I'm out the door, I've got things to do. So that's it.
Yes, that's definitely something that I'm learning. So I'm actually only in my 3rd year of teaching at the moment. And I look back at my first full year, so not my training years. Gosh, I used to spend so much time planning my lessons, making sure every PowerPoint was absolutely perfect and every image was so reflective of what I was saying. And I've become so much more efficient in my time. So I do think it is something that comes with experience, absolutely. You also mentioned that you were leaving teaching. I think our listeners would love to hear your story and obviously how you feel about leaving the classroom and what gave you the confidence.
I feel fine about it now, but it took me a long time to get to this point. When I started the business, it was with the long-term goal of giving myself the option of leaving the classroom if I wanted to. But I had thought for years, I probably could have, financially speaking, left the classroom at least 3 years ago with my business. But I decided, I can't leave my students. And what if I get out of the loop of what's changing in education and knowing the mark schemes and all of this? So for ages, I knew I could, but I just didn't want to, because I felt like I was like abandoning the students. But I was like, I'm going to go part-time. That will be my compromise. And someone said to me last year, the minute you go part-time, the next year you will definitely leave. And I was like, no, I won't. And then it got to about October and I was like, oh no, they're right. I am definitely going to leave. I just need to check. I had to like wait for myself to remortgage so that I could use like my full-time, not full-time, but employment to help get my mortgage. So it's been easier because I've only been given a year 13 form this year instead of 12s and 13s. And if I had to leave my year 12s going into year 13s, I don't know if I could have done it. I would have felt awful. But because my year 13 forms have gone, they finished, I'm not leaving a form tutor group without someone that they've had consistently. So I don't feel guilty from that point of view. It's been hard saying goodbye to my 10s and 12s because their reaction was, oh, we're going into year 11 and year 13 next year. How can you leave us? But it's just reminding them that no teacher is irreplaceable. There are so many amazing teachers, and I know you've got next year. They're going to be fantastic. You're in safe hands. And also I'm on YouTube, so you can always find me there if you need me. But no, I'm now at the point where I'm really looking forward to it and excited because I've been spreading myself way too thin for about 3 years now that I desperately need that extra time to focus on myself, my children and my business. So I'm at the point where I'm ready.
It's so interesting. We've obviously been having these conversations for quite a while with numerous teachers, ex-assistant heads, ex-head teachers, and the word that comes up all the time is guilt. And it's so interesting because I think it's the only profession where we feel this emotion so strongly. We build and have such good relationships with our students, our pupils. And it is, I know other people that have also left the profession, they said exactly the same. It's that guilt feeling, but we have to remind ourselves that we have to do what's right for us. And especially if we have have a family and other people to think about, then we have to do what's right for us. So thank you for sharing that, and hopefully you've inspired some other people also to have the confidence and try not and feel too guilty about it. So I'd love to start from the beginning and hear why you decided to become a teacher.
So for me, it's something that I decided towards the end of third year at university, which was my last year. So I did a biology degree and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I loved my degree. I absolutely loved biology, but I had no interest in going into research or lab work because, first of all, whenever I did that at university, I was incredibly clumsy, would make so many mistakes. I was very impatient, always looking for shortcuts, which is not what you need as someone working in a lab. So it just was not suited to me at all. And I'd also worked at children's camps throughout my Easter and summer holidays when I was at university. And no one wanted to work with like the teenagers group. They're like, oh, it's the worst group. And so we all had to like take it in turns. And when it was my turn, I was dreading it. And then I was like, they're the easiest group. They were so fun to work with. And I was like, no one likes them. I'll volunteer every time to do the teenager group. And that's when I was starting to think like, well, I loved working with the teenagers. I love biology. My mum was a teacher. Lots of my family friends were. So I was like, why don't I just apply for a PGCE? It's 1 year. If I don't like it, I can do something else and let's just see what happens. And it turns out I absolutely loved it. So never turned back. Straight after uni, went into teaching. And I've been doing it ever since up until this point, which is about 15 years now, I think.
I love that. And it's actually really similar to my story. So I obviously loved science, biology specifically, and it's what I teach now. I also worked at summer camps. I did Camp America, and it was one of the best things I've done, the best things. And I had the older groups and I loved it. And no one wanted them because they were like, they've got such an attitude compared to the younger ones who just want to please you. And I was like, I love working with them. I think it was great. And I actually found it naturally easier than the younger kids. I think it was just what the age group that I was meant to work with. So my story is really similar to you. I also had encouragement from my family as well. So I think it's interesting, isn't it? When you're doing such a scientific degree, there's so much encouragement to go into research. I know it's something that Miss Wild and I have experienced. And I actually did research for a year with the British Army. And I realised after that year it wasn't for me. And that was great. I still loved the experience, but I just knew at that point that I needed to do a PGCE. So very similar experiences to you. So have you got any sort of unique methods or approaches that you think make biology accessible and engaging? I know when I speak to other teachers, science is often a subject where they get quite a bit of resistance based on previous experiences students had. So have you got any sort of methods or approaches you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I was having to think about this one because I was thinking, what do I do that's unique? And I'm not sure how unique it is, or at least I never really thought it was unique until this year. A lot of the cards I got from year 13s pointed it out, and I was like, I didn't think that was unusual. But I use mini whiteboards with the students in every lesson, probably for over 50% of every single lesson. And I've always used whiteboards, but I think I use them, well, obviously incredibly heavily now. And it started because the school that I'm at, and it's probably goes hand in hand with science as well, students were afraid of getting the wrong answer and didn't want to offer any answers, and they wouldn't want to write anything down in their books in case it was wrong. So the whiteboard just gave them an option of writing something down. They hold it up, only I see it, no one else sees it. So if they get it wrong, they might just say, oh, well, no one saw it, it's fine. And if it is wrong, they can just wipe it out and change their answer anyway. It's not there permanently in their book. It's not been heard by everyone. So it was just a strategy from that side of things that meant I was getting far more students actively engaging. We don't do hands up anyway, because then it's always the same students with their hands up. We always pick students. But even then, I found that sometimes, even if I could pick and choose which students it was, if it's a bigger class, there's still someone that's probably not participated or offered an answer in the lesson. So if I've got them all answering every single time, then every student is having to show me their answer each time. So for me, from a point of view of monitoring progress, picking out misconceptions, seeing what students did and didn't understand, it was incredibly helpful. From their point of view, it was like a risk-free way for them to offer answers, so they're more willing to answer. And because they've got so used to it in my lessons, we just do it all the time. And I just go round, I could walk around and check their answers. And I'll just point to them and say, right, this bit's good, that bit needed to add a bit more, that bit's not quite right, add a bit more. Because I hear everyone gets similar feedback, no one's now afraid to write it down or embarrassed if they hear, oh, that wasn't quite right, you need to add to it. So they'll happily then just do it. But oh, is it right now? Not quite, okay, I'll add a bit more. And it's more competitive rather than this, oh, I've got it wrong and everyone's heard. So that's one thing that I've done. And as I know that's not unique to science, but it's a way that I've managed to get the whole class constantly engaged. And even if it's a loud person or a shy person, it's a way that they can still participate. But yeah, like I said, I had no idea that everyone in the school wasn't using them quite to the extent that I am. So I have some questions that are pre-planned, and then I'll be going through something and I'm like, oh, I wonder if they remember this from last lesson that links to it. And I'm like, oh, let's just quickly stop and check this. So it's just a way to have that continual retrieval as well. But apparently, yeah, not everyone does do it, because in my leavers cards, they just kept saying, and I'll always remember your mini whiteboard use, which is iconic. I was like, is it? I thought everyone was using this much, but apparently not. And I've been bought a lot of whiteboard pens as gifts because of it as well.
Gosh, I wish my students would buy me whiteboard pens. I get through them so quickly. And they always seem to go missing in my classroom for some reason. I use whiteboards all the time. I'm exactly the same. I've had this conversation with one of my friends that's a teacher, actually. And they said, and I'd love your insight on this. So whiteboards obviously great. It encourages them to not be scared of making mistakes. I think it like encourages engagement in the classroom. I love them. One of my friends has said to me before that they need to show, so their marking policy in their school is that they need to show progress in their books. So actually, in the classroom, a lot of teachers can't use whiteboards because they need to show that students making progress, and they actually need to get things wrong on paper to then show that they've made progress, move like on the next few lessons, for example. So just, have you ever come across this at all? Have you had any resistance from marking policies?
I'm very fortunate at the school that I've been at for 10 years, and this is one of the many reasons why I stay there for 10 years, that they have never had what I consider to be a policy that is for policy's sake. It doesn't actually help the student or the teacher. And to me personally, that policy isn't helping anyone. Like, yes, obviously we want to see that they're making progress, but I personally think it's silly to think that the only way to know if someone's making progress is if it's on paper, and you're then forcing people to do activities that aren't necessarily in the best interest of the students. And my school have always fully accepted that, and they're far more happy to just trust their teachers, first of all, take it from lesson observations that they can see what they're clearly making progress, because I can see what they were saying at the start of the lesson on their whiteboards towards the end. They've made loads of progress, or even just in their test results or from speaking to students. However, I realise if you're at a school that has that kind of policy, even if you agree with it or not, that's the situation you're in. I personally would then I'm the kind of person that would debate it anyway. And as a head of department, I always had the opportunity to debate it. And I'd then go to throw my research at them and be like, this is why that isn't actually effective. But again, that's not always the position you might be able to be in. If they have to see some kind of evidence on paper in the book, my suggestion would be, or I would do, so I could still use the mini whiteboards, would be have an activity at the start then, which they could do in their book, an activity at the end as well, or even just a homework, because if they just have to see in the books that progress has been made, then you can easily demonstrate that from one homework to the next piece of homework. And that is still in their book. And they must have made progress in the lesson, because you can see from the homework to this homework, they have improved. So that is still your paper evidence, I would say.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think it's, if you have the confidence to, I think it's really important that we do challenge these marking policies, because like you said, using the whiteboards is such an amazing method of actually getting kids engaged. And with the environment that teenagers are in these days, and they are scared of getting things wrong more so than anything else, because the pressure of exams and GCSEs are so high these days. So creating a classroom environment where they feel comfortable getting things wrong is really important. I like what you said about giving research as evidence to challenge these sorts of things. I know that's such a scientist approach, and I love it. And that would have been straight my method as well. I'd love to now to move and talk more about your business. And mainly, I'd like to start on the educational resources that you have available, because they are so beautiful. I know any teacher will appreciate how aesthetically pleasing they are. So if you could walk us through your process of creating these resources, because they're so wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I've got lots, but I'd say my three flagship products are my notes, active recall workbook, and the flashcards. And all of them, like every resource I make on Canva. And that's the resources, it's my online courses, it's everything I create on Instagram, unless it's like short form content, like everything I create on Canva. So that's one thing I'd highly recommend if you want to make something more aesthetically pleasing, is Canva, because it's so easy to use. And yeah, it's just amazing. But my approach to all of these was because I was the study skills coordinator at my school before I had the boys. So it must have been from 2017 to 2020. And part of that role, I did do a lot of research to see how students learn, what are the most effective ways to learn. And that's where I became such an advocate of active recall and retrieval, long-term retrieval as well. And from that research, that's what I used to come up with the ideas of the main resources I wanted to put out there, based on what I saw as a teacher lacking in terms of when companies come in trying to sell you things. So I actually started with the A-level notes. That was the first resource I made. And that was because I wanted an alternative to the textbook, because there's certain textbooks out there that I absolutely love and I think are amazing. Others, not so much, because they're not quite so specification based. But what I felt they all missed was the exam technique side of things in there. So they're really good at having keywords in there. But what I started to add to mine was keywords, but also topic summaries, essay links for AQA, and then adding in now like the examiner's tips and feedback, so they have a better understanding of this is what you need to know, but this is how it links to your exam paper. So that was the idea behind my notes, but also because so many students that I was teaching thought that spending hours copying down notes from a video or copying down notes from their book, they're working so hard, I've done so many hours of work, but why aren't I making any improvement? I kept saying to them, well, you're working passively, you're not testing that you actually remembered that or even understood it, you're just writing it down. And that feels like you know it because you're reading it, but if I ask you in an hour, you might have no memory of it at all. So I wanted to create those notes so they had a trusted set of notes that they could then refer to, so they don't have to spend hours writing down notes either in lesson or outside. Then when I finished that, that's when I was like, right, I need to have the alternative then that they should be doing. So that's when I made the active recall workbook, which was going hand in hand, using the specification to help me write it, using exam papers and answers to help me write it, as well as other textbooks and just my knowledge from teaching. Lots of short activities, whether it's fill in the gaps, label the diagram, short answer questions, comparison tables, but lots of things that actively test, did you actually understand it and can you remember it? And then the final one was the flashcards, because A-level biology, the mark scheme is so picky and specific, which I'm now even more aware of, having been an examiner. So I wanted to create all of the key words and terms for every topic and what is the mark scheme answer. And all of this information is out there for them already. It's all in the specification. I'm sure their teachers are saying it to them already, but it's just having it all collated in one easy place, readily done for them. And like you said, just putting some nice colours in and graphics, it suddenly just makes it feel a lot more, I don't know, usable, let's say. So that was like the thought process behind how I went about making all of them using Canva. The first ones, I actually made all of it from scratch myself. But for the last couple of years, because I've done it all for AQA, OCR, and now I'm trying to do all the other exam boards as well. But what I do now is I write the content and give a template, and I now pay students, and students now assemble it all on Canva for me, which is a win-win because I'm not having to do the Canva bit, which isn't my skill set. My skill set is biology. And for them, they love it. So like, someone's actually paid me to do work. We find it so hard to get a job. And I specifically only employ students for that because I know how hard it is for them to get a job, to get experience. And they are so tech savvy. They are amazing at it. The best people do get to do it. So now I pay students to set it all up on Canva and I write the content.
That's so great. I love that it is really hard for them to get a job. I remember when I was 14, I started working in a pub. You couldn't do that now. I think, and I say this all the time to my pupils, you can, because I teach A-level biology, you can memorize the whole textbook, but it doesn't mean you're going to get an A star. And it takes them a while to really process that. When they move from GCSE to A-level, it's such a big step. And I don't know if you agree with this, but a lot of the conversations that I've had with like family friends that are doing GCSE biology is they think, oh, well, biology is the easiest GCSE, so I'm going to take that one. And from that, they really underestimate the step up from GCSE to A-level. I also think the content A-level biology is just absolutely massive. It's so huge. The textbook, I don't even carry around with me because it's so heavy. And exam practice is vital. It's so important at A-level. Yeah, like I said, if you memorize the whole textbook, it doesn't really mean a lot because there's so much knowledge application that comes with the exam questions. And I teach AQA and they're very, very specific, as you said, in what they want. So if any teachers are listening to this and thinking, I want to share this with my students, can you tell the teachers that are listening how we can share that with their students?
Yes, if they were after sharing those resources with their students, it's missestruch.co.uk, and there's actually a student section and a teacher section because students can buy it for themselves, or there's like school licenses as well if you want to buy it for your school, or on the teacher section, that's where I sell all like lesson plans, PowerPoints and everything as well. So that's a completely different thing altogether.
Amazing, thank you. My next question then was, what are the common challenges that students face when learning biology or science?
Pretty much it's the two things that you just touched on there. First of all, the jump from GCSE to A-level in terms of the volume of content is enormous. And I'm sure that's the case for all A-levels. But I do often say to my students that A-level biology sometimes is like learning another language because there's so many new key terms that often they haven't come across yet from GCSE. And it's so important, not just using the key terms, but the clarity in which they explain themselves in their answers really matters. And I think that's one thing they struggle with from GCSE to A-level, because at GCSE, they're a lot more lenient with your explanations. And at A-level, it's so critical how you phrase something, even more than I realised, like I said, from doing the marking this year. And that is part of the battle, that they think, well, that's what I said, that's what I meant. It's like, well, actually, it might have been what you meant, but it isn't what you said because it could have been interpreted like this. So you need to be crystal clear that this is what you mean. So there's this huge volume of information they have to remember, which is why I'm like active recall, constant retrieval practice to keep it in your memory. But not only that, you have to have really good English, I think, for A-level biology to make sure that you understand you are explaining yourself clearly. So there's that side of it. But then the other part of it is all the skills. Because like you said, there's so much exam technique that you have to do practice questions. So for AQA, for paper 2, for example, 56% of the paper is application questions. So if you are just learning the information or reading the textbook, you're going to struggle to get above a grade C in A-level biology because you have to do your data analysis, critical analysis, application, maths questions, practicals, and that only comes from practice. And what I often see is the first test or first two tests that students do in year 12, they might think they've revised really, really well and they've put the hours in, and then they're really disappointed because they're getting C's and D's. And then I'll always speak to them and say, well, talk me through what you did for revision. First of all, let's have an honest discussion. Do you think you did enough? And sometimes they accept they haven't, but sometimes they say, yeah, I did so much. But what did you do? And they're like, well, I read through my notes. I watched all your YouTube videos. I read the textbook. I was like, well, this is why you got a C or a D then, because that should have been about 40% of your revision. The other 60% of your revision should have been testing yourself through like flashcards and exam questions, because that's what 60% of your paper is going to be. And I think you have to have that failure point to realize it, because if you're someone that is naturally a lot more academic, GCSEs are often a breeze for you because you can get by with minimal revision, learn the information, you get a really good grade, you follow that pattern at A level, and then you like have an absolute shock when you do your first test and realize that strategy doesn't work anymore, and you have to do more practice because it's a completely different style of paper. And I think that's often the biggest shock. And I actually find from year 12 to year 13, it's a big shock again for students, because the content in year 13 is so much more challenging than the content in year 12. And the exam questions are more application based because it's paper 2, which is more application. So they have that jump again in realizing how much of it is based on exam practice.
Absolutely. And I think if any A-level biology teachers are listening, they would just nod along to everything that you've been saying there. I think a conversation that I often have with my pupils, particularly the ones I tutor, because I tutor online, is biology is really hard at A-level. So it's okay to find it hard. You know, you've got maths in there. If you're doing AQA, you've got an essay to write. You've got knowledge application, thinking outside the box, that scientific brain. Those are three very different skills that you need to be able to master. So it's fine if you're finding it hard. Moving on to sort of online then, what trends do you see in online education? How has that changed over the last few years? And what do you think the future will look like for education online?
I think the big thing, first of all, is how much of a shift there is to online education over the last few years. And I think that is because of what everyone has learned post-COVID. Pre-COVID, I don't think there really was much online education. I did some online tutoring, but it was probably 50-50 online and in person. But since COVID, I do all of my tuition online, and students are more familiar with having online lessons because that's what it was at school for a year or maybe 2 years. So I think there is this change to online tuition, online group classes, online courses. That is something now that parents are more interested in, students more interested in, whereas it used to be, no, I want it to be face to face in person. So I know that I can definitely guarantee they're focusing, but people aren't as afraid of accepting things online. And also online resources. I think from my experience anyway, students seem to prefer digital resources like the digital notes instead of a textbook, because it's instant. The second they have bought it, it's there in their emails. Whereas if you buy a textbook, you're waiting at least a day for it to arrive. And if they see something that they want to help them with their homework, they want it there and then. They want that instant help. So I think there's this push to online. Changes, I think, in terms of in schools and outside of school, I'm going to be using it loads in my business. I think AI is going to have a huge, huge change, and I think it should do as well. ChatGPT, I don't know how you feel about it, but I know at my school, there's a lot of fear around ChatGPT. I was trying to push and use it a lot, and I actually got a lot of pushback from SLT. They were very worried about ChatGPT and worried about students using it for plagiarism and not actually doing the content themselves. But I think schools and even anyone with a business that isn't using AI and ChatGPT are going to fall massively behind, because I use it extensively in my business. Like, most of my email marketing is ChatGPT. I am not amazing at written English. And if anyone follows me on Instagram, they'll see how terrible I am at proofreading, typos. I know that's not my strength. So I copy what I want to say, put it into ChatGPT. I'm like, just correct everything, so I know it's awful. And that sort of thing just saves so much time. But aside from that, as teachers, the workload is insane. And I've been trying lots of different uses of it, because when I was head of department, I was trying to find ways to help with people's workloads in a way that I can, because I'm not someone that is making policies. So I was looking at, instead of planning a lesson where you have to write the questions, just putting in the prompt. So I showed my department lots of things you could do. So just copy the spec, or in my case, I was copying my A-level notes in. And then I just said, turn this into a 1 hour lesson plan that needs to be actively engaged for A-level students. I want to have 3 different activities, they're A grade standard, whatever it was. And it gave you a lesson plan. Yes, you have to tweak little bits of it, but it was a start point. But also things like I'd paste it in and say, turn that into a set of flashcards, turn it into multiple choice questions, turn it into short answer questions. And then I just had loads of activities, loads of homeworks, the answers already there. And it's that sort of thing that at the moment you could really utilize to cut down your workload. And in the future, it's probably already been done already, but if you're using ChatGPT to make those questions, there's bound to be programs where you can then get the students to type their answers in on the computer, and then it'll just automatically be marked as well. And all of these things are, yes, you would then have to check it and use your professional judgment, but that is going to take you maybe 10 minutes instead of an hour. And if you're doing that repeatedly throughout the day, it's saving so much time, and often you're getting better quality, or at least new ideas, and whatever you might need support with, like writing letters home, writing emails to people, writing reports and references. That's the one that I got in trouble about, but that's a whole other issue. My point was, I know the students, but I can't write about it very well. I just use ChatGPT to make my English so much better. But there was worries about whether that is then personal enough. But anyway, I think ChatGPT and AI could absolutely revolutionize it and really significantly help with teacher workloads if used appropriately and there was appropriate training and people got over the fear of it as well. I think it depends what your SLT is like in terms of being afraid of technology or not.
I think you've touched on something really huge there with AI. I know in my school at the moment, it was something at the beginning of the year because it had just come out. Well, I say just come out. It was coming out in the evidence. Schools were being really, like you say, a bit scared of it. And we decided to go with the approach of actually, as teachers, we owe it to our students to teach them about AI. And we had it in all of our personal development curriculum, how to use AI appropriately, what are the concerns with AI, what are the benefits of using AI. So we went into that in loads of detail to support the students. And we put training courses on for the teachers for how to use AI appropriately, like how to make teaching resources, how to make check for understanding tasks. And like you said, you can then use different softwares to mark that, to mark that work. So obviously you can use Microsoft, there's lots of Google Forms you can use, and it just reduces that workload for teachers substantially, absolutely substantially. So yeah, I think we could actually have a whole podcast on AI and beyond. But I know some schools are starting to purchase Teachmates AI to make those extra resources as well. So yeah, I think you've touched on a really good point there.
That's amazing that your school was so on board with it as well, because I was trying to push for it, but there was a lot of fear. But yeah, loads of good uses, like making timetables and all sorts for students. But yeah, that's amazing that they were then given that training.
I'm dyslexic, so I struggle with writing emails and things like that. I know what I want to say, I just struggle to put it on paper. So historically, I was using, forgotten the word, where it listens to you speak and it writes it out. Or just on Word, and then I copy and paste the email into my emails. And then I started using AI probably around November time last year, and it was just amazing. It used to take me so long to write emails, especially the important ones, where it takes so much time making sure my grammar was okay, everything like that. But I started using ChatGPT. I could write a full email in like 2 minutes. It was great. So I think it's an amazing thing. I think if I zoom out and kind of look at university, worry as someone that wasn't great in exams, I'm really good at coursework because I could take my time and there was no time pressure. I worry that in the future, one day, they'll remove coursework from university assessments because of AI. I worry about that. And I think about the kids like me that potentially wouldn't have got a very good grade at university because there wasn't that shared element of exams and coursework. But with everything that comes in, like there's pros and cons of every new invention that we seem to be coming up with. Right, we're coming to the end of our episode, and we finish every episode on a research bite. So could you please share your research bite with us this week?
I've actually picked out 2 books that were fundamental for changing my views, not changing, but informing my views when I was study skills coordinator and I had to come up with loads of resources. And it was one of them which was called A-Level Mindset. And this was by Martin Griffin and Steve Oakes. And it was all around the concept of VESPA, which as teachers, we love acronyms, which is vision, effort, systems, practice, and attitude. And all of this was going through like barriers for students that aren't improving when you would expect they should be. And it's looking at, well, do they have the correct vision? Are they putting in the right effort? Have they got the correct systems in place? Are they putting in the practice? And do they have the right attitude towards failure in particular? And there were so many activities within that. And I followed the workbook for that with, I think it was maybe 15 or 20 of our year 12s or year 13s who were furthest away from their target grades. And it wasn't necessarily because they were just lazy or not putting in the work. So we're picking students who on paper appeared they were trying really hard, but they just weren't making that progress. And from that, I actually learned a lot of ideas about students' perception of what is hard work, what is effort, the lack of systems they have in place, and just knowing how to organise themselves, knowing what good revision is. So that really helped me from my study skills point of view and as a teacher. And for now, me and my own business, it's really helped me to know the sorts of videos that as a teacher I would like to see out there on YouTube, and how I tailor my resources. And then the other one was how we learn. And a little subbit was throughout the rule book and unlock your brain's potential. But I found that one really interesting because it was more sciencey based, and I got to learn more about the brain and understanding how we actually learn. And then based on that, knowing different revision strategies, why they are so effective. And that's why I'm always talking about using flashcards on all of my social media, because flashcards I think are such a good way for improving long-term memory if used correctly. And it just went hand in hand with all of the science that I was learning from those 2 books. So yeah, I'd highly recommend either of those books for anyone that is teaching. And they do have the student version as well. So if there's students watching, there's student versions of at least the mindset book. So I'd recommend those definitely.
Thank you for sharing that. I love flashcards as well. I have to have the conversation with my pupils all the time that it's not about making them, and it's not about making them look pretty, because they spend hours just writing it out, all the different colours, especially the girls, bless them, they just make it all look so gorgeous. And I'm like, we actually have to use them correctly now. But it is quite funny to have that conversation with your pupils over and over again every year. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and it's been such a great conversation. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on YouTube as Miss Estruch Biology, and on Instagram and TikTok, in fact on all of them, Miss Estruch Biology. And then my website is missestruch.co.uk if you want to find any of my previous blogs or resources, whether it's the free resources or the paid ones, which are like the notes and things like that.
Amazing. And thank you again for our listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you next Wednesday for a next episode.